And we're going to get started.
That's right. Feel free to sit in the front row.
Yeah, feel free to come sit
Yeah, please
here.
do.
None of us will bite or spit.
Thank you all for coming. I'm Sam Boggs, the Alumni Director, and I'm very grateful to our panelists and our moderator. So Heather Dorian, who's class of 01, Paul Scott, Karen Bradley, and June Mann. So I'm just going to let them take it away, but we are live webcasting, which is pretty cool. It's a new thing that we're trying out. So people kind of all across the country can dial in, and then we'll put it up on the website. But we're excited for tonight, and I'll pass it off to you guys.
Great.
Great.
So we had no idea how many people would show up today, and we thought it might be one.
It was one for a while there.
Right. So we're really glad that you're here, and in some ways that we're a small group is great. Chris, hello, welcome back. So we were talking. We had lunch today, except for Heather was in Santa Clara. For those of us who were here, and we'd really like this to be an open conversation rather than us talking with you. So feel free to chime in at any point. And the three of us sat down and we planned some questions, which we shared with Heather, and they start with biographical information. So rather than us introducing ourselves, it'll sort of come up in conversation. And I guess that's all we need to say to start.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm delighted to be here, be back on campus. It's always wonderful to get to come home and be here and to be with these three fine, wonderful people. So I'm just going to go across the row here. Paul, can you introduce yourself a little bit and remind us what you teach and how are your passions related to in the environment and ethics and environmental ethics?
Sure, great, thank you. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you, Sam, for putting this together. This is nice. So I've been teaching here for 13 years, and when I got the job, the core class that I was going to teach was Western Civ, and some of you have taken that class, and some of your children have taken that class, and some of you are just, married to my colleagues. I was also asked to take on 2 senior electives, and one senior elective is on the history of Islam, and the other was your class. You took my very first year working here, and it originally started out as a course on sort of Europeans traveling, particularly to the New World and Africa and Southeast Asia, starting in the 1500s. And actually, in teaching the class over the years and being inspired by students who would suggest books, and it trended more towards what it is now, which is a class where the students compare and contrast traditional views, indigenous peoples, let's say, views of nature with Western scientific views of nature. And so that's really what I'm going to talk about, the bulk of what I'll talk about on my end on this conversation. And why I'm interested in the environment. When I was a graduate student, I was working on a dissertation on an environmental history, and actually I was going to write about rivers and the role of rivers in the imagination of the West in Western Europe. And I think I grew up on the beach. My parents were environmentalists. My father is a potter. My mom's was a high school teacher, and I think they just sort of took me out of the house a lot, threw me in the water a lot, put me on the sand a lot, and inspired me to care about the world around me. So I guess as I got older and did more and more scholarship, it just was a sort of a natural fit. I just wanted to see how human beings have interacted, the history of human interaction with nature. I think that's how I came to where I am.
Awesome, thanks so much. That environmental history class was fantastic. I read all kinds of interesting things about forests.
That's right.
I can't remember. It was good. Okay. And Karen, what draws you to environmental ethics?
So I teach I teach History 10, which is U.S. history, and then 2 senior electives, comparative politics and ethics, and there's an environmental strand in both of those classes. And how I come to an interest in environmentalism is not unlike what Paul described. I've spent the first 8 years of my life in Brazil, and looking back on it, a lot of the time was outside. And my parents are both from the UK, and they're both children of the Depression and the war. They both were evacuated during the war. My mother's house was bombed, and out of that experience, they were frugal people. And I never thought about it at the time, but we had a very frugal lifestyle when we were kids. And looking back on it now, I realize that is inherently environmental, because when you're frugal, you use fewer resources. And what we did on weekends is we went hiking in Redwood Park after we moved to the Bay Area, and what we did on vacations is we went camping in the Sierras. So I too spent a lot of time outdoors, but there was not a conversation about the intellectualism. It was just, that's just what we did. And I think where it became a conscious thread of my life was after college. I spent a semester with the National Outdoor Leadership School in the Rockies, and I spent 4 months in the wilderness, and it was really transformative. Not only living in the wild, I still vividly remember coming back and getting on the freeway to drive back from Wyoming to California and looking at all the made-up people in the cars and thinking they looked like aliens. And I mean, it was really a culture shift. But also we had the most extraordinary instructors who taught us about environmental ethics and hunting ethics and leave no trace and just the intrinsic value of the wilderness. And we learned about the history of land protection in this country while we were in it. And we went all over the Rocky Mountains and into the Sierra Nevadas and into Canyonlands in Utah. And it was at that moment that I developed the ethic part. So then when I became a teacher at our rival school, I started an outdoors club. And I used to take kids once a month backpacking and rock climbing and bicycling, and just to get them out, So that's where I come to it personally. And so ever since, so that's sort of how can I, here in this urban environment, in this very busy school, help bring a sensibility of the environment into what I do as a teacher.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that. And Jean, you're our AP Environmental Science teacher here, and how did you come to finding this as your passion?
I think it began in high school, and I think when I think about the question you're asking, that's really what I'm drawn to the most, at least when I think about some time in my past. We don't have, where I went to high school, it was similar to Head-Royce. It was an independent school. But we didn't have any fallout type event until your senior year, and it was called Senior Challenge. And you'd go out into the woods for a week with a few someone from a leadership school, an outdoor leadership school, and I just remember feeling very different. My interactions with my classmates were different. And it felt like there was something special about being outside. I just remember really feeling that effect. Like, wow, this is not like being on campus anymore. And there's something that's changed about us. And I guess since then, I've always been drawn to the outdoors. Our family has I go up to Maine every summer, and we get to, where this house happens to be. It's pretty rural, and so I've just grown to enjoy being outdoors and. Have a little bit of climbing experience as well. I've gotten to really appreciate what California has, and I guess it came from that, just knowing that I love being outside myself and wanting to bring help students appreciate that as well in the classroom as best I could. I try to get them out of the class as much as I can. In the fall, we go to we have a parent here who's been very helpful in helping us set up a field trip to Golden Gate Raptor Observatory. That's been wonderful. And then in the spring, we go to we do a marine transect, a sampling transect. And so it would be nice if we had a schedule that would allow us to get out more, but we take what we can get. And and I find it a challenge to teach, but it's also what makes it really interesting. The course is not quite as cohesive as a biology or a chemistry or a physics. There's some ethics, like we'll get into that today. There's some economics that comes into it, some policy. And so it makes it for a complicated but really interesting course to teach, and I always look forward to it.
Thanks so much. So all of you, and myself included, and I'm assuming probably many of you, since you showed up here tonight, all have this love and passion for the environment, and we all probably see the intrinsic value of the beauty and don't necessarily think of it as a resource. And Gene and I were talking beforehand, and he says if you read literature, you'll see people talking about the instrumental value of nature, and I just wanted you to comment on that a little bit.
Sure. At least one of the topics we get into in AP Environmental Science is this idea of how people might value nature differently, and as a result, they might view the relationship differently with nature. So we might have someone who sees nature as having instrumental value, like I'll look at that tree over there and I say, oh, I can build some chairs out of it, or and that's sort of an extreme view, but that's at least the instrumental. You see nature has instrumental value, which would be in contrast with someone who might see the tree and say, wow, that tree is beautiful, it's producing oxygen for us, and I guess in a way one could argue that's instrumental, but the tree still has a life and it's still able to be itself. And then that I connect with the students to these different views of one person could be anthropocentric and see things as sort of being human focused, and like humans are sort of above whatever's around them and we take what we need, to one where you view nature with more of a biocentric perspective. You're recognizing sort of the needs of all living things around you, to the point where you have a more whole systems view, more ecocentric view. And I find that at least those two terms, intrinsic and instrumental, are helpful, at least in getting them to understand, to see how, and it's along this whole spectrum, of course. I mean, no one's all one end or all the other, but at least it helps them to see how we relate to nature, or how people have related to nature historically. And so that's at least what I try to bring up with that.
It's a great segue to go to Paul and
Jump
in on that.
Please.
Yeah, please do.
So that's great. So at the start of the environmental class now, what I sort of throw out to the kids that I take for granted that we are face to face with an environmental crisis. We don't really deal with a lot of arguments for or against whether or not climate change is happening. I mean, I think if you look out, I have a beautiful view out onto the bay, and most days if you look out of my window, you see a lot of smog, you see a lot of cars, you see a lot of development, you see a lot of environmental damage that's being done in the bay. And so I take it for granted that that's happening, and I talk to the kids about how we talk about how we know facts. We know a lot of facts about the problems that we face, but we don't necessarily seem to care enough to change our behaviors. And so this idea of intrinsic and instrumental value, by introducing the kids to how many indigenous cultures relate to the environment, we learn about how peoples over time have related to the environment in a totally different way from this whole idea of instrumental value would be mysterious, because in fact the nature around you and you are one. There's no separation. I breathe air, I eat food. When I die, I'm going to disintegrate into the stuff that is around me. I will feed these trees and the water, and you are what you eat is a cliche, but it's also abundantly true. And here we are thinking about what we can extract from the natural world, and in a way it's like, how can I tear myself apart? How can I rip myself up and damage myself? And so to introduce the students in a sort of serious and even philosophical way to these attitudes and ideas and traditions of these people who've never related to nature as an instrumental thing, helps, I think, the students to come to terms with an alternative, I guess, an alternative to the sort of dominant way that we relate to the world around us, to our non-human environment. And in the end, I'm searching for this notion of caring. Can we find a way to care? Because these facts that we amass don't seem to be enough. facts don't seem to be enough for us. We need some sort of, as one of my students now, Brian Burns, who's a militant animal liberationist, he keeps talking about visceral. It's a visceral, I have a visceral, this visceral reaction to animal suffering, and I'm like, exactly, that's what we're trying to find, a visceral reaction to this crisis, so that we then are inspired to do something about it.
Can I
Karen,
follow up on that? In my ethics class, I think I do similar things, but differently. The goal of my class in many ways is to make what's unconscious conscious and what's invisible visible. And so, for example, the whole idea that our thinking about the environment might be anthropocentric, that's a novel idea to most students. And so, so the other thing that I try to do is explore what it means to study what is right and what is good in a diverse society, where within the society you have people coming from a lot of different ethical traditions, and to make those visible and conscious instead of invisible and unconscious. And so, so we spend a lot of time looking at a variety, certainly not all that exists, but a sampling of ethical traditions that have fundamental assumptions that vary, so that people can understand that you might have an argument with somebody about the value of a redwood tree, or the value of a human life, or the value of a non-human animal life, and you both might be arguing an ethical position but coming from a very different ethical tradition. And if you have no idea that that's what's happening, then you are very disempowered in that conversation. So it's about making us aware that in a lot of our conversations about right and wrong, and the hot conversations in our society, a lot of the misunderstanding arises from the fact that people's assumptions are unconscious. And so then in particular, with regard to thinking in a philosophical, ethical way about the role of humans in the world, I do a unit on utilitarianism that focuses on Peter Singer and animal rights. And there the kids have to grapple with the idea that, perhaps the right way to think about what's right is not in a human-centered way, and the initial reaction is, okay, fine, and maybe that means not killing animals for food, and no, can't handle that. For many of them, and so trying to connect the abstract to the concrete in things that we really care about, and things that are so unconscious and invisible in our society about how we consume the plant and animal world without thinking about the ways in which it is produced, processed, and consumed, and then thrown away afterwards. And it's challenging. It's really, and my hope, because this is, after all, high school, my hope is that what we achieve is maybe it's the visceral caring about something that we didn't even know was there to care about, to the questioning or the noticing that underneath everything that everybody says is a set of assumptions, and if we explore the assumptions, then maybe we question the assumptions, and when we question the assumptions, we begin to care about things that we didn't care about before. And it's a long journey, I think, so our goal is to open the door, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Regarding the diversity point you made, I discovered in my biology class that I have someone who has some experience boar hunting and skinning a boar, and someone who's a vegan. And I knew going into this is the about the time of year where we get to animal dissections, and we're going to be dissecting. In the past, we've dissected fetal pigs, and I've given people a choice. I mean, I say you can do it, you can't, you don't have to. You can do the online option if you're not comfortable. But we never really had a discussion about their justification for not wanting to do it or wanting to do it. And so I felt like that was something that was missing from the course. I kind of sort of go through the motions, and we're moving through it, but I wanted to give it some airtime. So they responded to this question, why are you, what do you want to do? But then also to ask them to provide some justification so that at least the class could see the diversity of perspectives. And maybe the boar hunter will have a better understanding of why the vegan might not want to do this. at least in an effort so that it's exposed, it's out there, people see the different opinions, and maybe, I'm not looking to, I don't like to try to like, change people in class or, bring my own principles onto it. Maybe I should from an earlier conversation we just had. It should be a little more, I should bring more of my values into the classroom. But it was something, at least as a science teacher, it was a little new for me, but I think it's something that really is an important conversation to have, and at least let the students air it. And it's interesting. I think in the past, I feel like there is more of a trend to more of the online dissection now than doing it for real, which I find interesting. I don't know what that means, and maybe it's just 1 year, so maybe the next year it'll change. But.
Can I jump in and tell part of your story?
Sure.
So we were having lunch today, and Jean said there's now an iPad app for the fetal pig dissection, and it's photographs. So when you would normally cut open the stomach, you press on the stomach, and then the next photograph appears, which I think is kind of fabulous.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's probably better too than when it was when I last started too. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
With the smell of formaldehyde.
Yeah,
I know. Integral
Miss
part.
out on that. Right.
That is, it's a sensory.
They'll miss out on the smell.
And the feel of the cutting, right?
You could bring in formaldehyde. And
That's true.
Have a bucket in the room.
Just there's no smell-o-vision on an iPad.
Google smell.
Being across the hall from you, I won't mind.
I don't know about
Nice. So, what all of you guys were talking about is really getting to the idea of like how do we engage students so that they can hopefully empower them to become environmental stewards. And to that end, I'm curious. This wasn't on the pre-questions, but I'm curious. How do you engage students with looking at our developing world and the choices that are going to need to be made about environmental usage and what can we do as a big power that's been using resources? What place are we in to perhaps guide, cajole any of the above? And how do you have those discussions with your students?
Wow.
I'll give you a moment to think, because that was a big.
So I don't know if this is why Paul was hitting his head, but part of my thought is in my classes, at the end of the day, I feel like we're still too much in our heads, and I don't know if that's what you meant at all.
I was trying to get back into my head. Think about that.
It's a tall order, and I think we all told stories about spending a lot of time outdoors when we were kids and what an impact that had on our sense of self. And I think a lot of our students spend precious little time in the out of doors, and I just think that's critical because you can't really love nature for itself unless you spend time in nature.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. And I mean, I think taking into account the facts, I guess, of being in a school like this, with a schedule like ours, and being busy, and every year in my annual report I write, I'm gonna try and get my kids out of the classroom more than I do, and every year I write that. So I can't say that I'm exactly succeeding. I think there's also a way. I guess I found that my students are intimidated by the idea of saving the world, and in the sense of getting out there and being the change that you want to be. All of that sort of. I had a bunch of students in my environmental class just last week say, I can't be Gandhi. Like, that's too tall an order. Like, Gandhi's tough. That's a tough standard to hit. So in thinking about your question, I mean, I think there's enormous power in bringing forward the reality of our situation as people. And by that I mean we make decisions every day that have monumental environmental impacts. And so although I have these fond memories of being in nature, I was a suburban kid, and so nature was, I didn't go to the forest, and we were not real campers. We would camp once a year or something like that. But the little space between my house and the neighbor's house, I have such a memory of that as a wild place where I could build forts and I could feed ants sugar, and I think my mom pushed me to get out of the house and go do stuff outside. And so I'm always remarking to the kids, like, this idea that these trees and I have a relationship, that the natural world is right there. It's right outside that door. And it's also in this room. You know, we're animals, and we're breathing, and we're interacting with one another, and I'm breathing you in, and you're breathing me in, and there's magic. There's a magical connection, a physical, sensorial connection that goes on all the time if you just see it, and if you honor it, and if you think about the implications of that, which are, of course, that your life and my life are knit together inexorably, and what happens to you is happening to me, and what happens to me is happening to you. And that, all of a sudden, you know, I'm in a wild place. I'm in the classroom, but I'm in this wild place of interconnectivity and chaos. And so I guess partly what I try to do is remind the students that they themselves, in this one spot, right where they are, right in this moment, and in every moment here on after, is this wild, zesty, magical thing. You just have to see it. You just have to feel it, and that can alter, you know, the decisions that you make and the trajectory you go down in your life, I guess. So, I mean, that's the little bit I try to do in light of not going to Sassel Creek as much as I should. It's right there, you know. I could go on a long block, really. It's not very far.
You asked about.
And Jean, so I asked a couple different things.
Sure.
And what you guys have addressed so far is really, how do you engage students as environmental stewards? So I want you to answer that part of it and see, how do you think that the best way for you to engage students, especially with your courses, to recruit them to be environmental stewards?
I mean, what I hope does it is getting them outside, getting them on those field trips, taking them to places where maybe it's new for them, where, yeah, we can read some about it, I mean, but also to see that you can have a greater appreciation for the place where you are once you've done a little bit of background reading behind it as well. So I feel fortunate in that we can get out as much as we do. And I'm always trying to add a little bit more each year if possible. But for me, I feel like that's, at least personally, that's what really did it for me. It wasn't necessarily a deliberate thing that the teacher had planned, but I really remember vividly my 7th grade teacher who set up this amazing trip to the Outer Banks, North Carolina, and we measured all these things, and I totally took it for granted at the time, but it's those kinds of experiences that I think will, maybe you don't like see it the next day in class, and Mr. Van, let me tell you what that did for me. Maybe maybe in 10 years, like, at least that's my hope.
Every teacher's dream.
But you know, I don't count on that because I know myself that it didn't happen to me. So it's like, you know, maybe in 15 years, oh man, that was actually really cool. You know,
right.
Because it is, I think I have that tendency. I have a habit of just getting into this classroom mode and lesson planning and you know, the structure of a lesson within a classroom. And I found it to be, you know, really opens things up once you're outside. I feel like there's more intent in my planning. You know, I have, you know, clear aims outdoors once we're getting out there. And there are things that you're not going to be able to plan for as well that are nice surprises as well. I feel like you also asked about development.
I did. So so the other question that I kind of threw in there as a big curveball for you guys was, we've got a lot of developing world out there that are starting to hugely draw on the natural resources. They've a lot of cultures that are making the shift from being one with nature to seeing nature as this anthropogenic thing that it can be used and is there to serve us. And so my question to you guys, because there is that real problem of, I can't be Gandhi, I can't be Mother Teresa, like, what are you asking of me? Like, don't try that. Don't pull that with me, you know, and which is totally the teenage response to asking that. But how can we begin to engage our students, or even just, what do you guys think as educated adults that are experts in these fields that you teach? What do you do?
I mean, at least I can't say I can provide them with answers, but at least I try to give them some tools where they can analyze the situation, I found, at least we begin the year talking about the meaning of the term sustainability, at least in the context of the Brundtland Convention. I think they defined it, and indigenous populations are probably, it's in their blood for generations, but at least the way it's explained and the way I understand it is that we need to, live today in a way that doesn't compromise future generations, put simply. And then there are sort of three different ways of looking at it: the environment, the economy, and people, just sort of social. And so how can we, and sometimes, one might contradict the other, the economy is resource intensive, that seems to pull against the environmental sustainability, but at least that's the goal, and it seems it's a really complicated goal. And at least what I found, one tool I found to be really helpful is Gapminders, which maybe you guys are familiar with, which takes data from the UN, and you can plot X and Y axes, different factors, and one of the ones we do is Human Development Index, which I guess is a measure of how well off the population is, and takes all these factors, health, literacy, and then plots it against GDP, or I can't remember if it's GDP or carbon footprint, but they're both sort of similar. So so they see that there is this trend. You want countries, developing countries, to come out of, get into a next level where literacy rate is high, people are living with high standards of living, but we also don't want them to follow the same path that a lot of the other developed nations have already taken, that are very carbon intensive, or leave a large carbon footprint. And at least one thing I'd like to do more of, I can't say I've succeeded in this yet, is at least what are some of these potential pathways? Because one fear I have is, students might leave my course feeling geez, what am I going to do here? Because there are a lot of issues, but at least that's one area I'd like to explore, is what are some possible pathways for these developing nations without being patronizing. How can we also, at least give them some better guidance? Because we haven't necessarily done it the right way. But anyway.
I'd like to pick up one of the pieces you brought up, the economy, and looking at how, and want to throw out to you guys, how do you bring up the economy as a tool that could potentially serve environmental purposes, and do you address that in your courses, and if so, how?
Well, in comparative politics, we look at the battles over economic philosophy in the 20th century. And the free market versus the regulated market versus the totally controlled market, and the pros and cons of both of those.
Do you bring up cap and trade and looking at carbon trade?
We actually don't specifically. No. I'm trying to think. It doesn't come up in the context of environmentalism, because I'm trying to teach the kids about economic theory and the whole back and forth of Keynesianism and Friedmanism. But I think what we do address a little bit is the linearity of sort of the dominant economic paradigms in the Western world, but not with a view to environmentalism per se. But then later we come back and we look at growing resource scarcity. So I think so not specifically, but more abstractly, helping students to understand the nature of economic thought in the 20th century, and the battling notions that on the one hand, let it be creates the most good, and on the other hand, wise regulation creates the most good. And I'm hoping the takeaway the kids get is that in different situations the answer is different. Sometimes more regulation is better, and sometimes less regulation is better. But also just the whole nature of economic thought, in contrast to other societies and other times, is very linear, and there's a problem with that from a resource perspective. But then following that, we do look at resource scarcity, and I show a documentary called Crude Awakening, which is about peak oil. It's a very powerful film, and my goal there, again, as a teacher, I'm trying to sort of make visible what is not visible and make conscious what is not conscious. So for many students, the notion of peak oil is new, and the proximity of the decline of oil is a new concept. But then even more enormous than that is this notion that teenagers have that the way things are now is the way they always have been and the way they always will be. And so making them aware of how recent it is that petroleum became the building block of the world, and how proximal in the future it is that it's going to go away. And so getting a larger perspective on time, that it was really only in the early 20th century that oil became widely used, and within 100 years it's going to be much less widely used again. And so and then not giving them any answers. At the end of Crude Awakening, they visit a bunch of scientists and say, well, what about solar, and what about nuclear, and what about wind, and what about water, and what about biofuel? And sort of like in your class, the scientists all say, well, it could be a tiny bit of a big portfolio, but really it's not the solution. No, it's hydrogen. Yeah, too expensive, too far in the future. Great idea. No. And so the students come away saying, "Oh my gosh, there's no future." And then it is. It's pretty harsh. It's pretty harsh. But then you combine that with a combination of what if there were a rethinking of what is valuable in the world, of not necessarily stuff, but maybe interactions, and what if what was fashionable was not a consumer good, but an experience that didn't involve the use of resources, and what if even in rich countries the measure of wealth was not in stuff. And some years, I didn't show it this year, but some years I paired Crude Awakening with the film The Story of Stuff, which probably a lot of you are aware of. To help the students begin to imagine a different way of wealthy countries being. Because while I think it's true that we could show poor countries how to develop better than we did, but they're never going to listen. They'll just point their fingers right back and say, mud in your eye. How can you possibly tell us what to do? We want to be like you. Thank you very much. So I feel like we have to. The wealthy countries have to work on themselves first, and redefine value. So that's kind of, it's not strictly, it's philosophical again. It's sort of really trying to help students rethink what they've never thought about before. It was just I'm
going to jump in a little bit, actually, because when I was here, the class that I designed and taught was a sustainable product design class. And my big reason and passion for doing that was exactly the reason that Jean was kind of like, oh, they walk out of my class and they've got the weight of the world on them. And watching Crude Awakening, you get this doom and gloom. And the sustainable product design class the idea behind it was to look at what are the ways that we can turn a lot of these things on their head. The book that inspired me, that got me on the movement, is called Cradle to Cradle. And if you ever get a chance to hold a physical copy in your hand, do so, because you pick it up and it feels funny. It's really heavy and it feels kind of plasticky, and it's made not out of a tree. It's made out of a material that is made in such a way that you could melt it down and reuse it and make a book of the same quality out of that same material. The idea that it could actually be really, truly recycled as opposed to downcycled, which is what most of our recycling is right now. And that if you put a little thought into the design of a new product, you can actually upcycle things, that you can actually enrich your environment. And part of the class is looking to nature as our guide. Nobody looks at a cherry tree and all the blossoms that come down on the ground and says, what a wasteful process that is. You just grew all of these petals, you went to all this work and energy, and you threw them on the ground. But that going on the ground then turns into compost and enriches the life of the tree and many more plants all around it. And there's actually, in this book, there's a case study. There's a textile factory in Switzerland that, as making textiles, making fabrics kind of things, it's a very chemical intensive process. You have to do all kinds of testing of the water to ensure. They were right on a river, and of course, being an industrialized country, they were taking water out of the river and dumping really dirty water into the river, and they got tired with having to test their water and regulate it. So they said, we're going to redesign our factory. And they looked at all the chemicals and everything they did, and they started taking their water in, and they were still having to test their water, but the water coming out of their factory after this redesign was cleaner than the water going in. They were actually filtering the water by making their process, doing this thing. It is totally possible. We have such incredible ingenuity as people, as individuals, if we choose to think about it in that kind of positive way. So,
and then if you couple that with changing values, I remember
absolutely.
Vince Patty, I can remember he graduated 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
In Copo, they did a project that year where they were looking at the story of something that's in their lives. And one of the things that he had developed real value around was what clothes he wore. Did you know Vince?
Yeah, I knew Vince.
Yeah, so he did his project on his jeans. So he would buy one pair of jeans a year, and he spent $100 on them, and they came from a factory in Sweden, I think. Completely environmental process, completely handmade. The workers are treated well.
They have photographs of their factories on their website.
Yeah.
Not many jean companies do that.
Exactly. And what he modeled, and then it was hilarious because then he persuaded Curtis Serrano to be convert as well.
Oh my gosh.
He persuaded a number of his classmates that this is really valuable to have this ethic around jeans. It was really fabulous. And so you combine sort of what's possible in the processes with people, consumers changing what they value from a lot of stuff to some really fine stuff. Jeans. Yeah.
Back to your question about the economy, and actually I think
Paul's
going to want to. I'll let him do it then because I think I know where he's going.
I was just going to. One of the case studies we do in the environmental classes about Ecuador and oil, and it hits close to home, of course, because most of the oil that's drawn out of the Ecuador or in rainforest is brought right up to the refineries here in Richmond and goes into our cars. And so we look at this land, and we look at a couple of essays about the Horani people who live there, who have, to the one, said, look, we don't want your money, we don't want your development, we don't want your roads, we don't want your schools, we just want you to leave, we want you out of here. Versus the value of that oil, which we just read a report that a couple of economists did that estimate that it's about $90 billion of total value in the oil in there, and so there's an economic question. Is this place, and are these people, and is their culture worth $90 billion or not? Is it worth more than $90 billion? Is it worth less than $90 billion? And these economists just sort of threw up their hands in this report, which they were preparing sort of for the Ecuadorian government, kind of like cost-benefit analysis. And after almost a whole semester of reading about these various peoples and their relationship to the environment, the students were just apoplectic that somebody would try to put a price, that you would even try to put a price on a culture or on a people or on this place of unparalleled biodiversity. That does it have no value and therefore the value is zero, or is it limitless? That the value is infinite and you can't touch it. So to see the intersection again of really what we're talking about, I guess, are a collision of ethics or a collision of values, and to go out and see people whose values are so fundamentally different from ours and take them seriously. And maybe find to suggest to ourselves that here perhaps is an alternative. What that looks like for the kids, and part of your question is sort of practically speaking, what will they do with that knowledge? And I have to say, often the kids are a bit confounded, as in I don't quite know what I want to do with it. But then, we also look at, and I think that now is a fantastic time because you can gear in and make a difference in so many different ways. I know a lot of kids who are inspired to make a difference here by our work at school, and then you hear about them going off and doing amazing things that I don't know if were really available when I graduated from high school in 1989. I don't know if those kind of opportunities were out there. Maybe they were, and I just wasn't creative enough to know about them more. But you can find these amazing opportunities to go and farm, in Australia for free, and to go and do studies of coral reefs that are being depleted, to take a gap year and get right involved. There's just all these resources that are at the kids' fingertips. And I think that's exciting. If they're fired up to do it, there's so many opportunities to make a lot of positive change.
And like you said, they don't all cost an arm and a leg.
No, and it's amazing. You could get around the world for a year and spend very little money nowadays, which is pretty awesome. Yeah.
It's pretty wonderful.
Throw out an anecdote? Just
Sure.
listening to them.
Yeah, speak up, because we've got speakers down here.
So something happened today that had never happened in my 22 years at Head-Royce School. And it was a small moment, but it was a sense of change, which was a senior class president stood up and talked about the divestment movement. And they happened just to be speaking just before I was to stand up and say what I say every year about students driving too fast and leaving the parking lot at excessive speeds. And I was all poised to give my usual spiel. And for the first time ever, I was able to say, well, isn't that interesting? We've been listening to this important talk about divestment and that kids really care about it. And one way we can preserve fossil fuels is to slow down. In 22 years, I have never had a kid make the segue for me. It was different. It was different. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see the trustees engage with our seniors now about this issue of divestment. However it turns out, it's going to be a real education for all of us.
I just learned today that Green Team agreed to change their name to the Divestment Club.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, see.
So, anyway.
For those of you listening and not aware, the Board of Trustees is going to be meeting on May 12th with student bodies and to discuss kind of the sustainability practices of Head-Royce, because we are committed as a school, and I can say I feel still part of this here, but we do a lot of work, and so I'm really excited that the administration is willing to sit down and discuss with our students, and that our students are passionate enough to take a stand and make an announcement at morning meeting about.
Well, I mean, instead of the eyes couldn't roll because the kids had just preceded me.
Right.
There was no way for them to sort of.
And also, I think it's an object lesson in connecting the abstract concept of divestment of the school's portfolio or a government's investments and what I do with my foot on the pedal in the car. And I think that the kids need lots and lots and lots of examples of that, because there are a lot of moments where the connections are missed still.
Making those connections, absolutely really important. If you were going to jump in.
Well, I was just going to mention, after your description of your course, I just want to at least make a plug, and I know we can't pan the camera over to my colleague, but Jen Brakeman has had in her AP curriculum for how many years now? Biomimicry?
Biomimicry.
Oh, yeah, it's a fabulous project.
Five-ish, okay. But after the AP, you guys have enough airtime to sort of just let loose and let them explore they look to nature for inspiration on a design. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which isn't a whole semester, which is what you're describing, but I think is one way in which students do get exposed to solutions.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
And the point that I was making with that random story about the textile mill is that that company was able to save tons and tons of money by changing their practices. That you can actually make an environmental choice that is also an economically favorable, sound choice, and that if you take the time to look at all your different options, you might very well be able to save money. And I mean, the whole argument for solar panels on the roof of your house, if you are a homeowner, do it. You will save money in the long run to be able to do that. And it's that looking and weighing kind of upfront costs and looking at that. But to answer kind of about biomimicry, it's something that we started when I was teaching AP Bio with Jen.
I think you actually started it, and I was on that bandwagon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
Because it's okay. No, that's totally fine. It's, I mean, it's incredible. If you look at some of the look at e-readers today, the e-reader technology, and looking at fabulous DLP displays that don't require any energy while they're being used, and they're using the same technology that are in butterflies' wings. You look at the refraction index on, you know, the tiny grooves. If you really have ever looked at a butterfly wing, you can see that it's made up of all these tiny little strips, and it acts like a diffraction grating, which just will bounce out angles of light, all different light. This white light in here is not white. I hate to blow your brains, but it's really probably just red, green, and blue with probably maybe a little bit of an orange in it. Those different frequencies, wavelengths of light, and they bounce at different angles because they're different wavelengths. And so you can actually create a display that will reflect only certain colors of light based on kind of the difference in height of two things. And so people are using this technology that they get just by looking in nature. One of the biggest examples of this, if you get the chance to go to Spain, the Sagrada Familia, which is in Barcelona, is a beautiful cathedral that is still being built off of Gaudi's architecture plan. And Gaudi was kind of the original biomimicrist. He looked at trees and figured out how to build really strong supports in his cathedral, which is hundreds of feet tall, by looking at the way trees branch out and grow. And, you know, there's so much stuff out there for us to learn from nature, from the stuff that we're connected to get back to what Paul was saying, is really, you know, it's so powerful, this connection that we have, and we can take advantage of the information that nature has to offer us. So at this point, I wanted to kind of open up to questions from the audience. I hear people have been scribbling notes. I'm like, does anybody have any burning questions that they would love for one of our panelists to address, or all of our panelists to address? Give you guys a moment. Do we have anybody on the interwebs? Oh, yeah.
So as the school is sort of moving forward and re-envisioning the curriculum, what would you hope to see the kind of changes that might make, whether it's in the schedule or the structure, that you think would enable the efforts?
Karen's ready.
I have so many ideas. So I want classroom spaces that don't have rows of chairs and tables, and I want classroom walls that can be windows. So my husband was at the GE software R&D facility in San Ramon last week, and he said they have this R&D room where the walls they can be transparent, or they can be screens, or they can be walls. And I would love that, so that we have choices. And I find the seating in regular classrooms to be so constraining. I think the whole idea that kids sit down all day is just crazy. So there's that, and then
Yeah, you're bouncing balls.
Yeah, I have yoga balls in my classroom. I think everybody knows that. But the other thing I would really like is I know a school in Oregon that every Thursday they have Thursday afternoon out, and the entire school goes outside. And some of them are doing service projects, and some of them are going for hikes, and some of them are biking, and some of them are learning about nature, but they're all outside. All the adults and all the kids, they're all outside every week for a whole afternoon. And I think that's a schedule like that gave us big chunks of time and just said we're all going outside would be so good for the community.
One of the things I feel you were asking earlier, what do we do to help our students become stewards? And I was thinking back again on at least the function of the field trips, at least, as they become, they're introduced to the skills of being a steward of a watershed. They do water testing, to being a steward of biodiversity and, understanding hawk migration and, studying a bird and learning about it in detail and how the environment can impact it. So at least, yeah, so I second Karen's suggestion of having a schedule that allows us to take advantage of that and have give the students more experiences like that, where there's time to, mess up that test and go back and redo it so that they can leave feeling confident in in that, I could actually, protect this. In the classroom, yeah, there's limits to how far, we can go with that. I mean, that's, and I think every class probably there's some element of that, more time, different setting that I bet everyone in their own way, in their own departmental way, could see benefit in.
So I'll give you two answers. One is that our school is in Oakland, and I think that our curricular re-envisioning should take that more into account. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. We are physically in Oakland, which is something we could talk more about and learn more about in our classes from K through 12. We are in a city that has some pretty serious political and social problems. We could confront those more directly and be a source for positive change. And I think we can have a schedule and a curriculum that confronts those issues, I think, more directly. So that's one. The other is maybe more, it's a pet project or just a pet thing for me. And maybe it's a bigger deal. But I'm a big fan of Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry is this ornery farmer from Kentucky and a beautiful writer and poet. And he has this phrase that he uses a lot, which is wise use. And I come back to that all the time when I'm teaching and when I'm working with students. And I think our ultimate goal should be to help students move towards wisdom. And I think that this panel, the idea of environmental ethics is to me at the core of that notion of wisdom. And so in all that we do, whether it's physics class or pre-calculus or history, all of these classes can be imparting facts to kids, and even skills, thinking in a sense neutrally. You can learn a lot about history and not get an inch more wiser. And you can learn a lot about math and not get an inch wiser, and you can learn a lot about anything really and not get an inch wiser. And so I think we do a lot of this here, but I would like us to do more, where this notion of wisdom is something that the faculty and the administration, we talk about. What do we mean by that? What is a wise citizen? We've talked a lot about citizenship and I think effectively this year, but what is a wise citizen? Let's talk about that more, and let's put that into all of our coursework. We talk a lot about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And my provocative quote, which was to try and drum up business for this thing, was, you can be a really dreadful scientist, and you can be a dreadful engineer, and you can create dreadful technology like landmines, and you can be dreadful at all of these things. And so our job is not just to create engineers, but wise engineers, and not just technologists, not just innovators. As I say, nuclear weapons were innovative. Innovation is not a value. It's not a value neutral thing. You can innovate in a way that is disastrous, and you can innovate in a way that is beautiful and life affirming. And I think that more and more I feel it's sort of almost old fashioned, but I think we should be talking about wisdom and all the time. We should be talking about it all the time, because that's what I hope that my students leave a bit wiser. And so that I guess when I think about, I'm on the curriculum re-envisioning committee, and when I think about my work, I'm always thinking about how do I do that, and how do we do that? And I'm not entirely sure. I guess I'm not entirely sure, except how I do things, which is I talk about it a lot in my classes with my kids. But yeah, that to me is like, I keep hearing about, we need more computer science classes, which I'm not opposed to, but I hope we're going to do wise computer science.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back to that idea of value that Karen, you were really talking about before, that getting that gut sensation, that connection, that caring, because if they care, and then my personal pet peeve or pet project is really critical thinking and getting people to question, because absolutely, I am an engineer. I went to school, I did that, and I saw a bunch of projects and worked on projects that I was like, ooh, when I figured out really what was going on, I was like, that makes me a little uncomfortable. And you know what? I left. Because, you know, you can think about things if you've been prepped. And I feel like this school as a whole, one of the real strengths is that we encourage students to connect to their values and that we encourage students to be critical thinkers. And I guess my hope as the school continues to move forward is that we hold on to that value of really encouraging our students to ask questions, there's a lot of hot buzzwords around inquiry, education, and that is really trying to figure out what is wise. That is what inquiry is. It's like trying to figure out what is wise and how can we be critical thinkers and letting the students make mistakes, as Jean was saying. Like giving them the time to think and make mistakes is so important. So all of you guys asked for more time. How have you felt like the block schedule has been help or detriment to?
I would like more. It's great.
Want even more.
Yeah, what you wish for.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Crystal's got a question in the back there.
So I look at the three of you, and I look around this room, and there's a lot of teachers of high school students, and talking about senior electives when kids are really at their prime, ready to launch into college and all this big thinking. And then I look over here at my darling colleague, Chris Dunlap, and I think about the work she did in Deborah Harper. And I think about my daughter watching silkworms mate in our house. Like, you know, like, ah! So I wonder if you have thoughts, because you're all parents as well, on, you know, is there an earlier intersection with our kids? I don't know if you've all read the Geography of Childhood. And just like, how can we get our small kids into wild places and start that on wonder earlier? And then also, how can we bring parents into this conversation so that we're not waiting for 17-year-olds or 18-year-olds to launch and take care of this, but we have, you know, whatever, a parent who's an environmentalist teaching her children how to take this on earlier. So I don't know if there's an answer there, but I know you're all parents of younger kids, and
well, I'd love to respond because I have a 6th grader who's 12, and I feel like the environmental education she got as a lower schooler here was really profound. And yes, we take her to wild places, and my folks have a house that my dad built by hand up in Mendocino County, and we go up there and we just hang out, and we watch the lizards, and we catch snakes, and we, you know, swim in the pond, and you know, a lot of city folks would say there's nothing there. but she loves it, and it's funny when we go up there because she's an only child, and I say, who do you want to invite to go? And there's only a couple of her classmates who she thinks would like it, who would see something there. And there's one who we have to tell her to leave her cell phone at home, although there's no cell connection there. But so I think that actually our lower school right now is doing a phenomenal job, and I feel like it's the older kids who have less of it in their heart. Like the work that they did with the littlest kids about needing versus wanting. I remember getting so many lectures from Rachel of, Mom, do you really need that? Mom, let's not go shopping. Let's, you know, it was great stuff. And then as they get older, there's more of a consumerist thing that
the little kids are filled with wonder.
They are.
I think, you know, it's like they've got it in them. And so I think that the task is to keep nurturing them, nurturing that. You know, when I talk to my seniors about their experience, they sort of shift radically between sort of disappointment at the emphasis on college admissions and the emphasis on grades and the hyper competition that they've felt since they've been in the high school versus these powerful friendships that they've built with one another and with their teachers, and with this place they feel a sense of home that is very powerful and profound and touching. And so, you know, when I talk with the seniors, we try to strategize how could we keep at bay these things that are trying to take away our wonder and turn us into cogs or turn us into you know, rapacious, focused only on our single selfish ambition. And so, I mean, I guess that's the challenge. I agree that, you know, my daughter is she's a wild kid. And the school hasn't taken that from her at all. It's nurtured it for sure. So she's a 4th grader, and so I'm more wondering like what's going to happen in middle school, and not just because of Head-Royce, but because of the reality of the culture that my daughter's headed towards. You know, as she becomes more exposed to those things that I can't control.
And I would also add to that we have had sort of pretty much this steady small stream of kids who are so passionate about environmental. We had Jeremiah, and then we had Reva Kahn-Halleck, and now we have Brian Burns, who create mini movements. And they single-handedly raise consciousness at the school while they are here among their peers in a way that I can't take the credit for, I don't think any of us can take the credit for being the inspiration for those kids, but they are a huge inspiration to all of us.
Absolutely.
May they keep arriving.
Yeah.
Really.
I want to wrap us up. And,
Oh, I was just going to say I had the good fortune last weekend of going to the Green Schools National Conference in Sacramento, and one of the workshops was presenting data on if we want to create more environmentalists, more people that will go out and save the world, how do we scaffold that? How do we get those kids? And with the research that was presented, it was really evident that although schools provide like these peak experiences, like going to Yosemite and going on these wonderful field trips or summer programs or things, that alone did not create people that really cared, that went on to do something. What kept coming back was that they had to have the experiences of going fishing. They had to have the experiences of walking Saucil Creek on a Saturday afternoon, that it was all those cumulative kinds of experiences growing up. And then the peak experiences were the catalyst to going on, and that you needed both of them to create the environmentalists that we need for the future. And so I think, it's the same thing as we always say, it starts in the home, and how do we as a school, we create those peak experiences, but we also have to create an environment within our community that values those, going away kinds of camping.
Right.
And that's a real challenge in our Oakland community and with the busyness that we have in our life. But that's, I think, if we want to create environmentalists that graduate, we have to create an opportunity and a culture that values those things as we're growing up. And I think that's kind of one of the things the lower school we unconsciously do, is that we put value on those kinds of things. And it's just maybe unconscious, but we could potentially make it more conscious.
Yeah, absolutely. So my sister, who is also an alum, now works exclusively in garden and food education in the UK, and they've actually just mandated in the UK that it's now required in elementary education that you need to have both garden and food education happening at the elementary level. And so she's got work, which is great, but she's getting to develop curriculum and literally introduce kids to where their food comes from and how do things work in the garden. And when I walked in today, I walked past the garden and just saw, I'm so grateful that that project has taken off and thrived, and that there's chickens, that the kids can see that. And I would encourage, and I know that Gretchen would absolutely encourage, to take advantage of that and to incorporate the garden into curricula at all levels, and maybe even the middle school is the place where it needs to be happening, because that is, I will say from experience as a student and as a teacher, that that's, I think, the biggest risk for disengagement and losing that sense of wonder, and getting to grow something and then be able to cook something that tastes good from the dirt is incredible. So,
Alan,
yeah.
I've been working in environmental biology and studying birds for 30 years and bringing citizens in, mainly adults but kids too. And one of the things I find is I think troubling is a kind of trend to infantilize is that a word, infantilize environmental education and hold on to it as a realm of children. And I think one of the things that you guys need to face, and maybe Gene especially, because I've worked closely with Gene, is that your roles as role models for these kids, valuing environment as adults, may be the most powerful tool you have. Even more important than bringing them outside is that you say, I went fishing last week and I had the best time, and it gave me a sense of magic and gave me a sense of connection to streams, and that you talk about this and create a discussion in it in your work with the kids, I think is really important. I kind of got slammed with this. We have kids come up to Hawk Hill to see the hawks fly by, and a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, one of the teachers came to me and said, I don't want to just see the hawks, I want to talk to your adult volunteers about why they're doing this. And I realized there was this whole level that I had missed, which is kids walking up to adults saying, why do you value spending a 7-hour day watching birds fly overhead next to the Golden Gate? And that was maybe more powerful than seeing a red-tailed hawk close up. So about 3 years ago, I got another piece of junk mail from the Nature and Children people, Richard Love, Nature Deficit Disorder. And I love his stuff. And in fact, I really wish I'd thought of Nature Deficit Disorder, because it was a brilliant. But I said, I actually spontaneously wrote him a 10-minute thing back and said, Richard, I got to say, I don't think it's about the kids. I think it's about the adults, role modeling for the kids. And if they see us valuing stuff like sports that $10 millions and billions of dollars, and the stuff that we value, why should they believe that we really enjoyed fishing when we were kids? I mean, bullshit. It's just kids are looking at us saying, what are you doing with your time now? You're gardening? Oh wow, I think she likes gardening. I might like, that's the they're watching us. It's that show me, don't tell me stuff. So anyway, just to intervene on this, I got to tell you, Richard Love wrote me back 10 minutes within and immediately said, my next book is on adult nature education. And it came out a few years later, and he put my comments in chapter 5. Got me to shut up.
Teach you a lesson.
I loved it. He took it immediately and he said, I'm right with you, and I'm seeing this too. And he's but anyway, I love you guys for what you brought to this at Head-Royce and what my children have learned from you. But I really want to emphasize that your presence as a meaningful and role modeling and exciting, passionate adult is maybe more important than anything on your curriculum.
Absolutely, yeah. We need to wrap
I'm
up.
so interested, because it is going to be really interesting, the whole re-envisioning the curriculum. I visited a university this year in which every computer science professor also teaches philosophy. So, and I'm looking at you three up there, and I'm just thinking, boy, we're still in our silos so much. We got the historian, and then we got the environmentalist, but we actually are. I'm seeing sort of the barriers dissolve as the three of you talk, and I just hope we will continue to try to make sure that we work in different areas, and that we're not that the humanitarian folks are not separate from our scientists and engineers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was really fun having lunches to talk about this.
It's
like,
been nice.
Got us to talk.
So I just want to take time to say thank you
Well,
so
thank
much
you.
to
Thank
three
you
of you
for
guys for coming and sharing your thoughts and ideas with all of us. And thank you all for coming and participating and asking great questions. And we've got some food and some refreshments back there. So I would say feel free.
Thank you.